We know Putin also gained his moral outlook in a sports club from his coach, and it was not just a judo coach, but more of a coach in criminal rules of life and contempt for others. That was his coach. But then, how it happened that millions of Russians who didn't have a coach like that still think like their leader, like Putin? We're dealing with something much deeper than a biography of one person and a politician, of one murderer. We're dealing with something in Russian culture itself, something that inevitably leads it into war.
Too much. Thanks so much. Дуже дякую. Слава Україні! Олено, усі учасники і учасниці.
First, ladies and gentlemen from Austria, Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania, Finland, Serbia, Germany. Dear Alex, thank you. Thank you for the support, for the participation. First and foremost, thank you for being with Ukraine and in Ukraine. And that this is already the fifth summit of the First Ladies and Gentlemen. This summit is taking place and it's important. It's taking place despite alarms, despite the threats. And this summit is dedicated to the most important thing, the thing that should truly prevail in this war. Of course, it's independence. Of course, it's our sovereign state. Of course, our extraordinarily brave people. But all of this is still united around humanity. It is humanity that must prevail. Sometimes we may hear from politicians, and the further they are from the real situation, the more confidently they say it, that Ukraine and Russia is primarily divided by a matter of territories, that territory is the core issue of this war. Of course, we are fighting for our land. Of course, we are defending our sovereign territory, and this is absolutely fair and just. But it is worth looking at what exactly Russia is bringing upon our land. It's always very clear and evident. The closer Russia comes, the less life there is. I mean, any life. Just less people. Less of everything connected with humans that make human happy. And the closer Russia is, the more those destroyed lives, the more those traces of life that was one existent and now turned into ruins. The territories seized by Russia often become depopulated. Even Donetsk, that was once one of the richest and the strongest cities of Ukraine, has been turned into a situation when there is no normal life. And this is not only about Ukraine. Over the 20th century, the Moscow state took control of different territories, and everywhere one can compare what life looks like under control of Russia and what life like among their neighbors. Close by, but completely different life. Take Karelia and Finland. The Kaliningrad region and the voivodeship of Poland or the territories of Germany, we can see the difference between Belarus and Lithuania. We can see the difference between what we are doing on our land and what Russia does on our temporarily occupied territory. It's absolutely clear that the true boundary between us and Russia is the attitude towards people. Now, that's everything. That everything that defines many things. Either humanity has value and the life is built on that aspect, or only one person has all the value. The one person that decides everything, so everyone else would have no normal life. That is what Russia brings, and that is the leader that is on top of Russia. And what's going to be after that person? The topic of our summit is education. Not only the system of education, but the confidence that through education we would be able to protect humanity, prevent wars, and strengthen peace. Is that really possible? We can all find information about Putin's teachers. Russian propagandists like to show his German language teacher, an experienced person, truly proud of her pupil. She taught Putin German, but she couldn't teach him to become a European. Putin graduated Langgrad University with a degree in law, and yet, how did this lawyer manage to rule Russia in such a way that ended up under an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court? And what is the reason for that warrant? For the abduction of children. We know Putin also gained his moral outlook in a sports club from his coach, and it was not just a judo coach, but more of a coach in criminal rules of life and contempt for others. That was his coach. But then, how it happened that millions of Russians who didn't have a coach like that still think like their leader, like Putin? We're dealing with something much deeper than a biography of one person and a politician, of one murderer. We're dealing with something in Russian culture itself, something that inevitably leads it into war. Whom has Russia not fought for among its neighbors? With everyone, even China. They once tried to humiliate and colonize. There was a time when they thought to seize Manchuria and other Chinese lands. Can now Russian school children or students today, can they learn in the process of their education about this truthful history of Russia? Of course not. Russia's political dishonesty is largely built on academic dishonesty, on the dishonesty of those who teach children. Russia's history had many wars of conquest, but has it ever apologized for any of these wars of conquest? Of course, no. Never. But Russia's confidence that it can get away with new wars is based on examples like we have in Georgia, when the authorities in Georgia, uh, through their behavior to their opponents, it's closer to Russian regime rather than European government. Is criminal disregard for human life out of favor in Russia? On the contrary, they cultivate it. And we see it on the front line that criminal rules mean more in the Russian armed forces than the statutes. It's not only about the Wagner mercenaries, but about many other Russian units, about how they are shooting their own soldiers who are trying to retreat from the battlefield, how they're throwing soldiers into pits for defending their rights, how they're looting their own, looting and torturing prisoners. This is embedded in Russian culture. It produces Putins. It teaches contempt for people and for humanity. And that is something that continues to exist and grows even stronger. This is why it's so difficult to agree on peace with Russia. That is why trade with Russia, economic cooperation, any joint projects will not help to restrain Russia from war. It will only give it money for what? For another war. Russia teaches this to its people in schools, in sport clubs, in universities, but unfortunately also in many of the families and in mass culture products. And that is a lesson for all of us, for everyone who seeks protection from Russia and a guaranteed security for our children. For as long as Russian schools do not teach humanity, treaties with Russia will not work. And if as long as Russian universities can regard international criminals as respected alumni, all of us, Russia's neighbors, must think about our own security. And if Russia continues staying this way, we must continue to think how to limit its influence on our countries, on our economies, our culture, our media, our education, and our children. That is why, whenever we're speaking of isolating Russia for this war, we're speaking of much more than sanctions. We're speaking of self defense. We're speaking of preserving people and humanity in our countries. We need such family policies, such support to families in our countries that would allow parents to have more opportunities to see how their children grow and what shapes them in their lives. We need far more connections between our countries, not only at the political level, but at the level of communities and people. We're talking about school exchanges and some possibilities for our students. We must carefully look at everything, every content that our children is watching. We need to have university cooperation if that anyhow involves with the economic environment or any other environment of Russia. That means people who had no strengths to accuse this war of conquest, even though they have all the information about this. We must be modern in advancing the truthful historical knowledge. Russia is very advanced in pushing propaganda, and we must respond to it not only with textbooks, but with mass culture. Yesterday, I had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Ukraine, with the Minister of Finance, and our cultural team, and we discussed about this, about creating content, thousands, many thousands of hours of content that can be an alternative to Russian content. This is the task for every country to consciously support its culture, its education, its families, and to make sure that this is happening on the basis of respect to people, to humanity, and to everything humane. My first teacher was in Mongolia. My father worked there, and I went to the first grade to do the school there. And we were absolutely different children in the class. The children were coming from different countries and regions, from Mongolia, from Buryatia, from Ukraine, from other countries. And the first thing the teacher taught us was to stay together, to be close to one another, so that we would be accepting one another and respecting one another, so that we would communicate. We, young boys and girls, could coexist without conflicts, in peace. And I think she succeeded. And it's important that in our countries, we would always succeed in the same manner. However different the children are, they would still need to learn how to be Europeans. I studied at the university and got a degree in law. I didn't really want to be a lawyer, but it happened so that the law eventually came into my life, and many important laws and decrees, the state regulation, many different procedures that work with partners, with international organizations and institutions, and among other things, we've made it happen that Russian leader came under ICC arrest warrant. He deserves it. And it's important that in our countries this principle would work, meaning there is an inevitability of punishment, there's a sense of justice, and therefore a normal legal education that should be different from the one given to the graduates of the Leningrad University. Maybe it's too much about myself, but still, my father was a master of sport. He's also a PhD in technical sciences. He's a lecturer. He's been dealing with the education for all his life. And he always tells me that knowledge matters greatly, but titles, they do not. Though himself, he has both degrees and titles. I do sport all of my life, but I didn't become a master of sport, yet it helps me greatly, especially now when discipline and an ability to be disciplined means ability to be effective, and I need to learn a lot very precisely, particularly everything related to security, to weapons. In many cases, the knowledge of Ukraine about the availability of certain weapons in the partners is better than the partners have it, and it allows us to um, endure so many years. We are still holding, because millions of our people are able to do something better than the others. They know what is the self-discipline. They know that knowledge wins. They learn this at home. They learn this at school and in the university. Many in sports clubs, but in those about real sport and not about some criminal laws. In the end, we must prevail on every field, in law, in culture, and therefore in the field of education as well, in order to have our advantage in security. And it's important that we see this challenge in the same way. Everyone different, but still in the same way. Humanity must prevail. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine.
For your self-support, dedication, and humanity. Thank you.
Today's conversation about education for peace would not be completed without perspective of the country recognized worldwide of its perfect education system and its values-driven society. Please welcome the President of Finland, Mr. Alexander Stubb.
The apology comes from, I think, Vladimir and me, because we realize the burden that we have to take because of our careers. You are put into places where you were not necessarily asked to go. I have this conversation with Susanne quite frequently at home as well. And I'm sure you have it with your respective spouses. But believe me, the appreciation that we have for the work that you do, especially in a situation like we have here in Ukraine today, is huge. So thank you very much. It's very difficult to come here on stage after Vladimir and talk about education and personal experience, but if you allow me, I'd like to make a few observations. The first one is to all the teachers that you have been working with and all the teachers in this room. I think Aristotle put it quite well 2,000 plus years ago. He said, there's nothing more meaningful than teaching the young. And I firmly believe that. I think that education is the basis of all civilization. I look at the Finnish experience. We were under Swedish rule for 700 years. But then from 1809 to 1917, we were a part of Russia. And what put us apart from Russia and Russianness was not only our ethnic background, not only our language, not only our history, not only our culture, but it was mainly the idea of civilization and education. So what we did for over 100 years was to try to install the idea of learning into each and every Finn. And a lot of people ask me, how did you end up having such a good education system? I would argue that it goes all the way back to the early 1800s, when the idea was that in order for you to survive in life, you have to learn, you have to read, you have to write, you have to communicate. And that's why we were one of the first countries in the world to reach 100% literacy. In many ways, it was about survival, because the truth is that education makes us to who we are. I'll give my personal example. I wasn't a fantastic student at school. I wanted to become a professional sportsman as well. Well, my dad was an ice hockey scout, talent scout. He always said, "Alex, study languages." And I said, "Why, Dad? I speak English, Swedish, and Finnish. I'm going to play in the NHL." Later I understood. He saw that I'm not going to become an ice hockey player. And my life changed with education actually in the United States. That's when I woke up to things academic. I started reading manically. I loved every minute of it. And that was the path, I would argue, to my own civilization. And I'm also a firm believer in the connection of body and mind. So I believe that if you take care of yourself, your mind ends up doing quite well. And I believe that it's a process. And the starting point for all of it actually is to be open, is to be curious, and is to be open to new ideas. And here's where we come to the big difference that Vladimir was talking about as well, and it's the interpretation of history. I'll just give you two examples. There is one country which weaponizes history for the interests of a sitting government. It is a country that has never been able to deal with its past, even look at its past from a critical perspective. And that is obviously Russia. I mean, when you see Stalin as some kind of a big hero, then you haven't dealt honestly with your civilization. When in school you are taught that your country has never done anything bad, when its DNA has been basically based on imperialism, then it's very difficult to advance. And my take is that you cannot base your foreign policy on victimizing yourself. You cannot base your foreign policy on whataboutism. And that's what we quite often see coming from Russia. But let me take you another example, and that is Germany. Germany, after horrendous Nazi regime of World War II, was able to deal with its past. It was able to go through the difficult questions of what it meant to be German in Germany from 1939 to 1945. And now you look at the difference. One country which is not able to be honest about its own history, and one country that was honest about its own history. So, as an eternal optimist, I feel that that can be done, but that means that your children in school have to be taught not propaganda, but the correct history. School teachers teach us social patterns, how to deal with each other. You're like your Mongolian teacher, that you need to be together. It's one of the most important things that you get as a kid. My big hero is Martti Ahtisaari. He received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2008. And I was able to be the chairman of the board of his Peace Foundation, CMI. And we started with the Ahtisaari Foundation school days, where the whole idea was peace mediation, on how to get kids together and discuss different things. And let me finish with something that I was able to outline at Kyiv University with the students just a few hours ago. I was trying to figure out what to say in the end, to the students. And I think it's something that works not only with young people, but with life in general. And it's 4 things that Susanne and I used to say to our youngsters who are now 21 and 23 and at university. And they are: dream, believe, work hard, and succeed. What do I mean with that? Dream, for me, when it comes to Ukraine, means that I always dream about peace. I dream that this nightmare will be over sooner rather than later. If we don't dream that there will be peace, it will not be achieved. Believe means that every day we have to believe that we can achieve a just and lasting peace, no matter how horrific things look day to day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. Work hard, rather self-evident, not only on the battlefield, but in the field of diplomacy, basically making sure that every day we work towards the dream of peace that we believe in, and we work hard. And for me, the 4th and final thing, success, that is defined only as a victory for Ukraine, as a victory for civilization, as a victory for openness, as a victory for peace. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you so much.